There are over 100,000 ships around the world. Every year, international shipping releases more than 800 million tons of carbon dioxide, contributing to the increase of global warming. According to the aims of the International Maritime Organization and the European Green Deal policy, the amount of greenhouse gases from maritime transport is to be reduced by 40% by the year 2030. 50% of reduction must be achieved by 2050. New zero-emission ships powered by alternative fuels as well as energy-saving technologies combined with other innovative retrofit solutions used on vessels in operation will play a key role in achieving this goal. Over the next decade, the global maritime industry faces a green transition that will completely reshape its future. Will European and especially Polish shipyards, design offices and equipment producers operating in the Baltic region be able to meet these challenges? What solutions do they offer to join the energy transition towards 2050? These questions will be answered by leading experts and industry representatives during the Greenmare International Summit, which will take place on the 20th of April this year. The event will be held as an open online conference under the honorary patronage of the Norwegian Embassy, Sea Europe, DNV, and the mayor of the city of Gdansk. Stay safe and remember to be with us at the Greenmare Conference. Good morning, everyone. We have a beautiful sunny weather in Gdansk. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all participants of the Greenmare Conference, which is an accompanying event to the Intermare South Baltic Trade Fair. My name is Gregory Landowski and I'm CEO of portal morski.pl and polandinSea.com, and I have an honor to be the moderator of the Greenmare Conference. Allow me to recall at this point Mr. Piotr Sojka, who died last year. He was the founder and chairman of Remontowa Holding, the largest shipbuilding group in Poland, but above all, he was the man open to the world and people. And he was constantly encouraging us to meet them and discuss with them, since he believed that without exchange of views, any kind of development is impossible. And that is why a few years ago, he inspired us to establish in Gdansk an event with a European dimension on the future of shipping. In this way, we are making his dream come true, as many participants across Europe are with us today. I have been told that the total number of the registered conference participants has exceeded 1,000. So I think that it is a good news for the beginning of our today's meeting. This is the first such event in Gdansk, unfortunately online, but hopefully it will be continued in traditional form in the years to come. I would like to express our great gratitude to the Norwegian Embassy to Poland, the Sea Europe Association, the DNV Classification Society, and the mayor of the city of Gdansk, who are the patrons of our conference. I would also like to thank all the speakers and panelists who are about to appear at this conference, helping us to identify what is ahead of us on the road towards decarbonization of shipping and zero-emission maritime transport. It is no coincidence that the Greenmare Conference is so well attended by our partners from Norway, which is a leader in promoting green shipping and has long been introducing environmentally friendly solutions on board. In a moment, representatives of the three patrons of today's event will speak. In their opening speeches, they will introduce us to different aspects of the topic. The first to take the floor will be Mr. Anders Eide, Ambassador of Norway to Poland. His speech will be followed by a short video clip.
Dzień dobry, good morning, god morgen alle sammen, and thanks to the organizers, the co-patrons, the experts and participants. It's lovely weather here in Warsaw today, but I must admit that as an ocean-loving Norwegian, I would have preferred to be in Gdansk, meeting all of you there, but let's hope for a better situation next year. I have three messages today. One, we are in a hurry. Two, we need to collaborate. And three, we have a great basis for that collaboration. The Greenmare comes at an important juncture. Not only is it Earth Day this week, with the summit on Thursday initiated by President Biden, but the pandemic has also reminded us of the need to speed up green transition. We need to stop global warming, and we need to get on track to fulfill the European emission reduction targets for 2030 and 2050, and of course also the IMO targets for 2050. We also need to take better care of our oceans. The oceans could be our best defense in fighting climate change, but for that, the oceans need to be healthy. So we need to stop plastic pollution and the loss of marine biodiversity now. We are, of course, also in a hurry if we want to maintain or strengthen our common European competitiveness in shipping. So it means even before we bring the interests of our kids into the equation, message number one today, the time to act is now. In Europe, all eyes are on the European Green Deal. Ambitions are high and new and stricter legislation is continuously being adopted. And powerful financial incentives put in place to underpin green transition. And never have the private equity markets been more focused, almost obsessed, we could say, on climate risk, ESG, and green growth. It's happening now. Poland is in many ways at the heart of European transition, not only because its entire energy system will have to be replaced, but also because Poland has proven to be such a dynamic engine for growth in Europe. With European long-term budgets and the stimulus packages now recently agreed, the next generation EU and so forth, Poland will continue to be the biggest beneficiary of EU and EEA funding in the years to come. So that will spur investments even further. So let's all contribute to make those investments as green and sustainable as possible. Also, Poland represents so much human resource, so much talent, ability, and competence. But make no mistake, as the Norwegian ambassador, I will argue, so does Norway. And the beauty of it all, if we join forces, we can complement each other and improve our joint competitiveness in European markets and beyond. The other day, I heard the expression, the Polish-Norwegian green shipping cluster. I love that idea. So today's message number two, collaboration, more collaboration. Poland and Norway, but please, all others are welcome to join in. And my point number three, we have a great point of departure for strengthening that collaboration. Our historic bonds are long and solid, and so is our mutual trust and confidence. We are among one another's most important trading partners, not least in the maritime industry, which amounts to 30% of bilateral trade. A steadily increasing number of Norwegian companies have established themselves in the Tri-City region, in shipbuilding, design, offshore industry, port infrastructure, coastal safety, transport, logistics, environmental protection, and you name it. DNV and Kongsberg Maritime alone employ hundreds of workers in the Tri-City region in Poland. It's a win-win. And Polish shipyards such as Remontowa and Christ continue to deliver state-of-the-art projects for Norwegian companies, including the world's largest hybrid ferry, the Nexans Aurora, and the next generation expedition ship, such as the National Geographic Resolution, and many others. I also need to highlight the strong human bonds resulting from more than 100,000 Poles living and working in Norway and making indispensable contributions to Norwegian society every day. And to top it off, the EEA and Norway grants, which amounts to more than 2 billion euro in total, and funding for thousands of projects all around Poland, building innovation and green competitiveness and expanding relations even further. I could continue elaborating about the excellence of Norwegian maritime industry and their role as a front runner in green tech, but I'll instead leave that for the experts to share their take on the trends and technologies and the challenges and opportunities that industry is facing. From the Norwegian government side, ambitions are sky high, both for green shipping and European Green Deal. The target of 50% cut in domestic shipping emissions by 2030 is only one example of how Norway is aiming to lead the way in green shipping. From the embassy, we are ready to be a partner and to step up further. Our modest ambition is for Norway to be not a partner for Poland, but the key partner for Poland in the green transition. I'll leave you with a short teaser video. Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you so much for the attention.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for this interesting speech and for your time. We are closely following Norway's activities in the field of ecology, and we are watching the development of various technologies and solutions used on board ships in Norway. I think that this is a good example and inspiration for other European countries that want to contribute to climate goals and are looking for their own way. In this regard, Norway works closely with the rest of Europe, also within its membership of the Sea Europe Association. Now it's a good moment to give the floor to the representative of Europe's largest organization of shipyards and equipment suppliers. I would like to ask Mr. Christoph Tidgett, Secretary General of Sea Europe, to take the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, dobry den, good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having invited Sea Europe. As you all know, Sea Europe represents the interests of shipyards and maritime equipment manufacturers in Europe, Norway, and Turkey. Our sector, also known under the term Maritime Technology sector, consists of some 300 shipyards and more than 28,000 maritime equipment manufacturers and suppliers. All these companies together generate an annual aggregated production value of almost 129 billion euros, and they create more than 1 million jobs. Within Sea Europe, Forum Okretowe is defending the interests of the Polish industry, and Norsk Industry is defending the interest of the Norwegian industry. Now, the maritime technology sector in Europe is strategic for Europe, and in many aspects, because the ships that we build in Europe, they protect Europe's defense, security, and maritime borders, but they also give Europe access to its seas, to its trades, and to its blue economy. And the same is valid for the systems, the equipment, and the technologies that our maritime equipment manufacturers produce. In October 2017, a study was carried out for the European Commission, and that study concluded that the next decade, the next 10 years, will be decisive for the future of Europe's shipyards and maritime equipment industry. These conclusions were at the time made against the background of Asia's massive state aid distortions, increased trade protectionism, and uncertain geopolitical tensions. However, with COVID-19, the future outlook of Europe's maritime technology sector looks even more uncertain than at the time that this Commission study was published in 2017. COVID-19 has indeed not only hit Europe much harder than Asia, especially in cruise and passenger shipbuilding. COVID-19 has also further aggravated the existing competitive and trade distortions that exist between Europe and Asia, unfortunately, to the detriment of Europe. In contrast to Asia, Europe's shipyards and maritime equipment companies don't receive specific COVID-19 benefits to survive the pandemic crisis. At best, they may receive some funding from the European Commission's 750 billion euros recovery and resilience funds through the national recovery and resilience plans. But this approach may not only lead to competition within the European market between those that receive funds from their member state and those who don't receive any funds from their member state, but also the money that will be given in the end will not be of the scale that Asia is giving to its own local companies. Nevertheless, COVID-19 can, and in my view, should be used as a turning point in Europe's policy towards its maritime technology sector. And I believe that the European Green Deal offers a perfect political momentum to that. To make waterborne transport a true zero-emission mode of transport by latest 2050, in accordance with the ambitions of the European Green Deal, Europe's shipyards and maritime equipment industry will be key, since the ships they build or retrofit and the equipment, systems, and technologies they produce will in the end turn zero-emission waterborne transport into a reality. However, as a result of COVID-19, it is anticipated that there will be hardly any new orders for new build ships between 2021 and likely 2023 or even 2024. To overcome that gap in demand, member state governments should invest inter alia via the money they receive from the EU Recovery and Resilience Fund into fleet renewal as well as into retrofit programs. But also at EU level, fleet renewal and retrofit programs should be adopted as soon as possible, not only to create demand for shipyards and maritime equipment manufacturers, but also to accelerate the necessary significant investments that are needed into research and development of innovative green technologies as well as sustainable alternative fuels and the integration of these fuels and technologies on board of ships. COVID-19, ladies and gentlemen, has learned us one crucial but hard lesson. Europe cannot afford being too dependent on foreign nations, and that is certainly the case for its maritime technology sector, where unfortunately merchant ships are mostly built in Asia, and also offshore activities have already partly moved to Asia as well, whilst Europe itself has become very dependent, perhaps too dependent, on a limited number of complex ship types, with all risks that may entail in case of a crisis like the one we have today. The pandemic crisis, as well as the potentially promising prospects from the European Green Deal, are in my view therefore an excellent wake-up call for Europe. And in my view, Europe should very soon, in the coming months, answer two fundamental questions. First, why is it that European ship owners are the only ones in the world that place only 5% of their orders for new ships in European shipyards, whilst they place 95% of their orders in Asia? First question. And second question is it not time for Europe, both the European Commission and also the member states individually, to adopt sector-specific policies, notably policies that are fit for the purpose of our sector and that also stimulate domestic demand for shipyards, in particular in view of zero-emission waterborne transport, whilst at the same time safeguarding Europe's current leadership in complex shipbuilding as well as in maritime equipment manufacturing. As we speak, ladies and gentlemen, See Europe, together with its members, is trying to answer these two questions as well as other questions. The reason why we do that is that once we have found ourselves the appropriate answers, we want to defend them towards all the decision makers, including the European Commission, because the ultimate goal we are trying to achieve is twofold. First, we want to assure that Europe maintains control over its own strategic maritime industry and can also safeguard itself, its maritime autonomy. And secondly, it is essential that in future, Europe will still have its own shipyards and own maritime equipment industry to secure a bright maritime future for the sector as also for its current and future workers. Many thanks for your attention, and I wish you all an excellent conference further. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christoph, for your speech and for the final call for Europe to wake up. We are hoping that Europe is listening. You have mentioned about 300 shipyards, over 28,000 of equipment suppliers, and 129 billion of euros, and more than 1 million jobs either to survive or to disappear. These figures are impressive, as is the very question of the survival and development of the European maritime sector as a strategic industry, as you have mentioned. You have also touched on many other problems, such as Europe's competition with the Far East or competition within Europe. I think we will come back to these issues later during the panel discussion. I would now like to ask the representative of DNV to take the floor. DNV is a company with strong Norwegian roots, but has grown from a national level to an international one, as it operates globally. DNV is very active, especially in the field of energy transition in the broad sense, of which maritime transport is an important part. Today we are hosting Mr. Knut Orbeck Nielsen, the CEO of DNV Maritime, whom I would like to ask to take the floor now.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Knut Orbeck Nielsen, and I am the CEO of DNV Maritime. I'm very thrilled to be here with you all today for the inaugural Greenmare Conference, the first of many, I do hope. And it is especially nice to find myself in the company of such distinguished lineup of speakers, each with their own unique and illuminating perspectives. I would especially like to thank the Norwegian ambassador in Poland, Mr. Anders Eide, and also see Europe's Mr. Christoph Tidgett, the Secretary General, for the very insightful opening remarks. Now, ladies and gentlemen, shipping accounts for just under 3% of the world's carbon emissions. This is equivalent to some 980 million tons of CO2 per annum. Small, perhaps, in comparison with the 7% of carbon emissions from commercial aircraft or the 41% of emission from passenger cars. But reducing this 3% in line with the IMO's greenhouse gas strategy is nonetheless an Everest to climb. Very challenging, but in my view, possible. In the 3 years since the IMO declared its ambition for shipping to halve the greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, shipping has made huge strides. It has adapted quickly to the sulfur cap and weathered the worst of the effects of the pandemic, but we are not there yet. Up to 30,000 vessels of the world fleet may have to be recertified to comply with upcoming EEXI regulation. The first milestone is 2050. Between now and 2030, not to mention 2050, a number of tectonic shifts threaten progress. Impatience with the IMO's progress on climate change is moving regional and national players to challenge its ambitions with their own goals. For example, the EU Green Deal and the prospect of shipping being brought into the scope of an emission trading system, uncertainty of the new US administration's policy plans for shipping, and not least China's pledge to go carbon neutral by 2060. The fragmented regulatory landscape has created a very difficult environment for ship owners to make sound strategic decisions. Ship owners risk operating in an uneven playing field. Ship owners have shown themselves very willing to contribute to carbon reduction, but in order to do this, they need regulatory stability and a fixed timeline. Of course, neither of these things are guaranteed, and the outcome of November's COP26 meeting may yet serve to deepen this complexity. Unpredictability also extends to markets where the standoff between China and the US, compounded by the ongoing pandemic, continue to cast a shadow over global trade. Fuel choice is the biggest conundrum for the industry in its pursuit of carbon neutrality. Released last September, our Maritime Forecast to 2050 report emphasizes that the biggest factor in decarbonization is in fact the fuels we use. And the fuel picture for shipping is becoming even more complicated. Not only is the number of potential fuels expanding, but the dizzying variables of fuel availability, price, and policy measures that could enable or negatively impact each choice make the fuel decision much more difficult. This complexity means that exploring a wide range of scenarios is essential, and that is exactly what we did in the report. I will summarize for you now some of its key findings. First, over the next decade, the shipping industry needs to start rolling out a new generation of carbon neutral ships if we are to make enough headway to meet the IMO's 2050 goals. Second, we cannot allow perfect to become the enemy of good. We mustn't wait for the ideal fuel to arrive before taking action. Our research shows that installing a dual fuel LNG engine is a robust choice for today, enabling future flexibility for vessels. It is cost effective, compliant, enabling a 20 to 25% reduction in tank-to-wake CO2 emissions, and flexible, setting aside space for fuel storage tanks. And thirdly, it is hard to identify clear winners among the many different fuel options across all 30 scenarios that we studied in the report, but e-ammonia, blue ammonia, and biomethanol are the most promising carbon-neutral fuels in the long run in a decarbonization trajectory. As I hope you can understand, the report offers no silver bullet to solve the fuel question, but its aim is to show that with foresight and a clear vision, we can chart a path through complexity. In these extraordinary times, we must make sound decisions today which protect our tomorrow. I'm encouraged that a growing number of players in the shipping industry are already heeding this advice. While less than 1% of the existing fleet runs on alternative fuels, last week DNV reported a record month for LNG new builds ordered, 21 contracted in March alone, and 50 for the year so far. It is by far the best choice for a bridging fuel, though LNG will not be enough to meet the IMO's 2050 ambition. Ammonia and hydrogen are gaining industry popularity as being the most viable zero carbon options, but they too present challenges. These include cost, bunkering, infrastructure, availability, storage, how to ensure the safe use, and the absence of regulatory framework. DNV's role as a class society is to ensure that the industry is equipped with the rules and knowledge needed to support a safe transition towards a carbon neutral future. Today, we have already published an ammonia white paper and safety handbook. Class rules are also currently under development, as well as an ammonia ready notation. Of the green, DNV class notations includes gas, fuel, LPG, gas ready, battery, and wind assisted propulsion systems. While our research predicts that hydrogen will have a limited uptake in 2050 for deep sea shipping, DNV is currently coordinating a joint industry project called Maritime, which aims to remove the regulatory and approval barriers to hydrogen as a fuel. The first phase of the project already concluded last year, and we are now into its second phase. And this will include the publication of a hydrogen handbook and some physical testing from our facilities at Spadeadem in the UK. But whether you are considering LNG, ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, or any other green fuel, I applaud your ambition. There is no time to waste. Beyond regulators, the pressure from charterers and cargo owners to financiers and the public is growing. And whether we like it or not, decarbonization is changing the risk landscape. So whether the fuel or choice of technology, safety must come first if we are to ensure a timely transition to a carbon neutral future. Through tireless collaboration, indefatigable innovation, and a safety-first mindset, I'm confident that together we can unlock decarbonization in shipping. And who knows, maybe in doing so, we who are responsible for that 3% can inspire those industries responsible for the other 97% to follow. Let us not be remembered for grudging compliance. Rather, let us be remembered for the pioneering spirit which has come to define our centuries-old industry. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure addressing you this morning. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention, and I believe it is now time for the panel debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Knut, for a very interesting opening speech, which brought a slightly broader perspective on energy transition issues. DNV operating globally has for many years been involved in various maritime decarbonization projects, including those related to the construction of new low-emission ships. DNV has thus accumulated valuable knowledge which it is happy to share with other industry participants. Mr. Piotr Sojka, whom I mentioned at the beginning, highly appreciated the cooperation with DNV and always believed that it is worthwhile to benefit from DNV's global experience. Many thanks to our speakers for their contributions, which have outlined the main topic areas of our conference. We now move to a panel discussion where we will try to tackle a more detailed picture of the challenges ahead of us. Today, we are talking during the third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has hit the entire maritime sector and brought uncertainty to its future. However, according to many, the great wave of the pandemic could paradoxically become a huge wave of changes that would accelerate the technological race related to the decarbonization of shipping and allowing companies to climb to higher levels of development. These changes will also affect many companies operating in the Baltic region, including in Poland. As we know, the Baltic is one of the most crowded waters in the world, accumulating a huge amount of harmful emissions and is very sensitive to climate change. What exactly is the IMO's strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and what exactly are the targets set, and what it really means? I think this will be best explained by our first panelist, who is Mr. Eirik Nichols, Director of Environment at DNV. Eirik, I invite you to speak now.
So what I will be doing today is to take you through the regulatory framework that we are presently implementing. I'll say a little bit about how we got here and not least where we are going. And of course, I do realize that having regulations for breakfast is sometimes a tough sell, but I will do my best to make it as painless as possible. So, without further ado, firstly, I just want to place the whole thing in context, because carbon reductions, CO2 reductions, have of course been something that's been discussed for a very long time. As far as shipping goes, it actually got off back in 1992, along with at the time of the opening of the ratification of the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Convention, and it's taken a while to get there. In essence, shipping has been the hostage in many ways of a political hostage of the broader international climate negotiations. So back in 2015, we got the Paris Agreement. That was a real breakthrough. We are all familiar with the targets, of course, limiting global warming to no more than 2 degrees C, preferably actually 1.5, implying that emissions need to peak extremely soon and then decline sharply. We also recognize that because of the unique complexities of an international business, both shipping and aviation were not part of the Paris Agreement, but the IMO and for shipping and ICAO for aviation were certainly agreed to be the responsible UN agencies. And what happened there was that in essence, the Paris broke the political deadlock at the IMO, so we were able to actually move on. The IMO had managed to do something. It actually managed to put in place the first international carbon reducing regulations through something called the Energy Efficiency Design Index back in 2013, which honestly is quite a milestone. Like I said, first international regulation focusing on CO2. But nevertheless, there is and was an agreement that there was more to do. So in 2018, the IMO agreed, after a very hard-fought political debate, its strategy on greenhouse gas reductions. And first and foremost, as written in green here, we have to understand that the IMO has decided to phase out greenhouse gases as soon as possible within this century. This is very carefully crafted political language because there was an ability to achieve agreement on certain milestones, but to say exactly when shipping was supposed to have decarbonized at that point in time, back in 18, that was a bridge too far in essence. Nevertheless, certain interim goals towards this ultimate goal were agreed. These are listed under the heading ambitions. Firstly, do something with existing regulations. Secondly, and what is the focus of the ongoing regulatory work and stuff that is being rolled out, to reduce or better the average carbon intensity of shipping by 40% within 2030 and 70% within 2050. Now, there was a recognition that only improving intensity does not guarantee actual reductions if you have a very robust economic growth, for instance. So there was also then the backstop paragraph, if you will, of having total greenhouse gas emissions reduced in absolute terms by at least 50% within 2050, compared with 2008 as the base year. There are a couple of things that are important to note here. Firstly, it is that in the ongoing work, the targets for 2030, the focus was on CO2 emissions. However, when you look at the 2050 goals, the target is focused on greenhouse gas emissions. And this has very real implications in that it means that the IMO is also going to be focusing on other substances than just the CO2. Methane, N2O, nitrous oxide are also becoming part of the regulatory framework at some point, and the work has already started on that. And most significantly, maybe, is in the context of today, the strategy is to be reviewed in 2023. And that is very significant because the keen observer will note that the IMO's ambitions, while being seen as quite ambitious back in 2018, the world has moved on, and the EU, for instance, has an ambition level that is actually significantly higher than the IMO at present for 2050. And as mentioned by previous speakers, we do know that the Biden administration has some very ambitious policy goals, and we expect to see these also materialize in some form of shipping targets, maybe already this week at the event on Thursday. So, moving onwards from there, the IMO back in 2018 thus had this kind of picture. We had a 2008 as a base year. We had an expectation of growth. We had the requirement to decarbonize, and we had a huge gap to fill. The IMO broke this down into three time segments, if you will, dealing with the short term, primarily by tightening the existing regulation, looking at midterm by imposing new additional regulations, starting to look at carbon pricing, which of course is a very hot potato today, considering what's going on in the EU and potentially other places, the UK, for instance. But last and not least, starting to work on getting new low carbon fuels, zero carbon fuels in place, because when we look at the long-term goals beyond 2030, the only way to actually decarbonize shipping is to develop and deploy carbon neutral fuels. We can do a lot with energy efficiency, we can do a lot with operations, not least in reducing the overall demand for new fuels, but to get to zero, we need new fuels. Now, fast forward, where are we today? Rather, where were we back in 2018, which was the focus of the last study on greenhouse gas emissions from shipping that we can see as authoritative one, the fourth IMO greenhouse gas study. As was mentioned by Mr. Nielsen, shipping's share of global emissions is right below 3%. We have, however, seen very significant efficiency improvements since 2008, anywhere between 21 and 32%, depending on how you calculate it. And this is bearing on the 40% intensity improvement requirement in the IMO strategy. And not least, today we're seeing the 2050 emissions are projected to be roughly at the same level as the 2008 emissions. Now, this is not great in the sense that you need to go down 50% compared with that, but compared to the really robust growth that was envisaged at the time of the strategy, we are dealing with a very big challenge, but a challenge that is smaller than it could have been at if the worst predictions had come to fruition. So what we're seeing happening now this year is that we will be having new greenhouse gas regulations being adopted in June. I won't go into the detail, but I do think that I should mention a couple of keywords here. EEXI, energy efficiency for existing ships, which is a retroactive one-off requirement to everything that floats, essentially, and that does not have a sufficiently strict energy efficiency design index. And the CII, the carbon intensity indicator, which is going to be a mandatory annual reduction target for actual operational emissions from ships. So these two constitute the package that is being put forward at the IMO this spring, and that we consider certain to be agreed and adopted. This can become effective as soon as 2023. In reality, it could become effective 1st of November 2022, but it will certainly not slide beyond 2023. And these will drive changes to how vessels are designed and operated. But the IMO is not working only on this. The IMO is also looking into what is the actual fuel greenhouse gas footprint, because the IMO and, well, other regulatory bodies have essentially been focusing on the tank-to-wake emissions of in connection with various fuels. However, we do have to recognize that there are emissions associated with the production, extraction, distribution, etc., of fuels, and the IMO is now starting to work on how to incorporate those emissions also into the actual greenhouse gas footprint, so that we don't make the wrong choices by focusing on the wrong things when we're trying to catalyze new fuels. There are proposals to how to strengthen R&D. That's also on the table, so that we can get the necessary research and innovation, and not least the funding for those in place to actually get the technologies we need. And as I mentioned previously, market-based measures, code words for carbon pricing, that discussion is also picking up again. It crashed and burned in 2010, 2011, but now it is actually starting to really pick up the pace again. So when we look at all of these things and think of what that means for the future fuel mix for the world fleet, we in DNV, we have been doing our technology outlook, our energy transition outlook reports for a few years now. And when we look at shipping and try to predict how the world is going to look moving towards 2050, what we expect to see is a really robust drop-off in the use of fossil oil. We are expecting to see a significant pickup of low carbon fuels. Electricity will also start to have a role, albeit not equally significant, but we also expect to see natural gas to function as a sort of bridging fuel, a transition towards the low carbon fuels. And I'm sure we'll be getting into the more detailed discussion of this during the panel debate. So the world is going to change radically as we move towards 2050 when it comes to what kind of fuels ships will be using. What that also, of course, then means is that from our perspective, given the longevity of the shipping assets, I mean, we're talking 30 years, maybe longer for certain ship segments, we really have to start working now. We have to prepare for and get on the decarbonization pathway this decade. That means that the ships we build today that will be afloat in 2050, a lot of them actually need to be, we need to think of how they can either be built or designed or modified at some point in the future to actually be able to decarbonize. We need a massive scale-up of new technologies. We need a massive scale-up of fuels. It's not sufficient just to say that something is feasible in a laboratory. We need to have it deployed. We need to have it rolled out. And as we are sharing the challenge with other industrial sectors, I would in particular highlight aviation. It may be that we could be seeing some synergies in the fuel industry when it comes to actually trying to focus on something that could be useful for all sectors. The regulations and incentives, they will start to impact already from 2023. It can be said that they will have started to impact already from today, because we are starting to see very serious thinking about how to cater to these new regulations that are incoming, so that people can be positioned in the best way possible to get competitive advantages when we get into the compliance dates. And finally, it's going to cost. Decarbonization is not going to come for free. It will impact investment costs, asset values, and it will impact earning capacity for sure. And in that sense, what is happening in the finance industry, what is happening with the EU taxonomy regulations, all of this is going to be very significant as we head into the future. And finally, just to remind ourselves, lest we forget, the world is watching. This picture is from outside the IMO headquarters in 2019, when we were debating how to actually start to implement the strategy in a meaningful way, and there were demonstrations on the outside. That is new. Shipping used to be out of sight, out of mind. No longer the case at all. So the world is watching, and we need to step up and do the best we can to satisfy the expectations that we are facing. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to the panel debate later.
Well, thank you, Eric, for your very interesting presentation. And thank you, by the way, for correcting and clarifying the information on the reduction values to be achieved. That was presented in the video clip promoting our conference, showed at the beginning of this conference. As far as I have understood, the long-term IMO's target is to reduce greenhouse gas emission by at least 50% by the year 2050. And in order to do this, carbon intensity of international shipping must be decreased by at least 40% by 2030, and at least by even 70% by the year 2050. So decarbonization is just a measure to achieve the long-term run.
That is correct. I think the important thing to understand is that efficiencies and absolute reductions are coupled, but not directly. So if you have very robust growth, a 70% efficiency improvement will not be enough. Maybe you need to head towards a 90% efficiency improvement by 2050. So it's a huge challenge, but it's important to distinguish those two figures. And at the end of the day, it's a 50% reduction in 2050 that stands there today. Though I do expect that when we get the IMO review in 2023, that target is very likely to tighten even further, to be honest.
I see. Thanks. It's good to have it precisely explained, since I guess it's a bit of misunderstanding in this regard. But I have questions to you. The first question is that the IMO 2018 greenhouse gases strategy was a very hard-won compromise, as you have mentioned. Is it realistic that there can be an international consensus for an even more ambitious one during the 2023 revision? Or will we be seeing international fragmentation, with some regions or countries then taking the lead and others becoming climate laggards?
It's $1 million question, right? I think it's very hard to, as always, it's hard to predict, but in particular about the future. But I think there is a very realistic chance that the IMO will be able to reach consensus in 2023 on a new and probably strengthened goal. And the reason is that the world has moved on since 2018. We've seen an evolution in opinions and attitudes and policies around the world. We will be seeing numerous administrations putting their weight behind robust reduction goals, and we've been seeing this happening domestically. We've seen Japan step up with a very ambitious greenhouse gas elimination strategy. China is stepping up, as Knut mentioned in his speech. We have the Biden administration doing something this week, and of course we have Glasgow in towards the fall. So I think that yes, there will be countries that will not want to go as far as others, but I think that it is really possible to reach a consensus. That will not hinder regions from doing things on their own. I expect the EU to do its ETS no matter what happens at the IMO. But I do have hopes that we will be able to maintain the international consensus.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your opinion for now. I think that we will meet during our final part of this conference. I think that your presentation brought some light to the very complicated matter that is IMO strategy. And I must say that I was particularly impressed by the slide that showed green activists outside IMO headquarters trying to encourage the introduction of slow steaming as soon as possible. I think that is a good illustration of the social tensions and political pressure of the shipping world over the energy transition. I must recall that Christoph Tidgett mentioned in his opening speech the political tensions involved both between Europe and China and also within Europe. He also mentioned the expectations of the European maritime sector and Sea Europe's efforts to defend and maintain the European shipyard and equipment industry in the new circumstances caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Can the European Green Deal policy be an effective tool in this battle? I now invite our second panelist, who is Christoph Tidgett, Secretary General of Sea Europe, to speak.
Thank you, Chair, and again, good morning to all of you. I will shortly, a bit along the lines of the previous speaker who focused on the IMO and the IMO activities as regards, I would say, sustainable waterborne transport. I will take a specific look from the European perspective and, of course, looking at it from the perspective of the shipyards and maritime equipment manufacturers in Europe. No doubt, the European Green Deal is the flagship of the European Commission led by Ms. von der Leyen, and the waterborne industry and shipping in particular have a core place in that flagship initiative, because the shipping industry is seen as an important contributor to air pollution and to climate change. And of course, the ambitions are very high. The EU wants to have zero emission, amongst others, zero emission waterborne transport by latest 2050. Now, the European Green Deal was published in December 2019, and since then, the European Commission has adopted a series of initiatives, and another batch of initiatives are expected in the coming weeks and in the coming months. And in my presentation, I will focus on 3 out of these Green Deal related initiatives. The first one, and the previous speaker has already referred to it, the European Commission wants to include shipping into the EU emission trading scheme. And what is it about? The European Commission wants that shipping companies, like other sectors, are part of that emission trading scheme, whereby annual caps are, let's say, determined on the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions that ship can emit, and companies can buy so-called emission allowances. And these caps will be lowered over time so that in the end, the more polluting shipping companies will have to pay more, buy more emission allowances from the less polluting companies. Or the better way is, of course, that companies are reducing their own greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, because at the end, that is the way that the European Commission expects shipping to become greener over time. A specific Commission proposal is expected on this matter in the next months, most likely before the summer of this year. Seen from the perspective of Sea Europe, we are not so much in favor of an EU ETS whereby shipping companies would be part, together with other industries, of that EU ETS system. What we have proposed instead is the setup of a dedicated EU Maritime Fund. What the name of the fund is not so important, but what is important is that the money that is collected from the polluters, from the polluting shipping companies, in the end is used to invest and speed up and accelerate the investments, the R&D activities in the sector itself. So basically, the money gathered from the sector should be reinvested in the sector to help in accelerating zero-emission waterborne transport, and also in order to help the sector, the European sector as such, in this greening exercise. A second initiative or second legislative proposal that is expected soon is the so-called Fuel EU Maritime. With that proposal, the European Commission wants to address the market barriers that are actually hampering the use of sustainable alternative fuels in ships and in ports. And at the same time, with that initiative, the Commission also wants to identify the uncertainties linked to the market readiness of so-called green technologies. For Sea Europe, the Fuel EU Maritime proposal is important, and what we are asking for is that it is not used to impose certain specific technologies or alternative fuels, but instead that it is left to the market and to the industry to develop the relevant technologies and fuels, and also to leave it to the market and to the industry to choose the technologies and the alternative fuels that they see fit for themselves, bearing in mind business considerations, bearing in mind competitiveness considerations. And the third initiative linked to the European Green Deal is the so-called green taxonomy. Now, in that exercise, which unfortunately is not really taking place in a very transparent manner, because it is, I would say, taking place behind closed doors with a number of pre-selected stakeholders, and Sea Europe is not part of that exercise, like many other maritime stakeholders are not part of that exercise. With the green taxonomy, the European Commission actually wants to identify which technologies will be considered green and which fuels will be considered alternative in future. And why is that important? Because in future, only the so-called green technologies and alternative fuels will be able to benefit from European subsidies in the future. That exercise, the green taxonomy, is also very relevant for Sea Europe, because it will be important to see what in the end will be considered green technology and alternative fuels. And why is that important? We all have already done a lot in terms of LNG as an alternative fuel. Investments have been made in that respect, so it would be important that LNG as an alternative fuel will be able to be seen, at least for some time, as one of the alternative fuels. And the same also for technologies like, for instance, scrubber technology. Also there, a lot of investments have been made, and also there it will be important that at least for some time these technologies will continue to qualify as a green technology. Beside these three initiatives, so inclusion of shipping into EU ETS, Fuel EU Maritime, and green taxonomy, another important initiative to mention is the so-called co-programmed partnership on zero-emission waterborne transport that has recently been approved by the European Commission. Now, that partnership has been developed under the wings of the waterborne technology platform, where the entire maritime community is sitting together to identify future agendas in terms of research and development, and Europe is taking a leading position therein. And with that partnership, the waterborne sector will receive a financial envelope of most likely 530 million euros for a period of 7 years, starting from this year, so period 2021-2027, which the sector can use to accelerate its activities in terms of research and development for zero-emission waterborne transport. So that is a very important initiative for the European maritime sector. Now, when lobbying the European institutions, to start from the European Commission, we in Europe, we call, and I mentioned it already earlier, for so-called technology and fuel neutrality, but also for a goal-based approach. What we believe is important is that the policymakers do not impose or do not prescribe any specific green technologies or any specific sustainable alternative fuels. Instead, they should take all the measures necessary to stimulate all the options that are available and that will help the sector to realize zero-emission waterborne transport. And when adopting these measures, it is of course also very important, and unfortunately very often also overlooked, that there is a very large variety of ship types and ship trades. They all have their specificities. So in other words, a one-size-fits-all approach is simply not possible to make waterborne transport a zero-emission mode of transport. And at the same time, it will also be important that at least for a transitional period, a continuation of fossil fuels with significant emission reduction potential will still be used. It will still be possible to use them. So it is a quite complex exercise. What is equally important is that the transition from today to full zero-emission waterborne transport will also require a lot of business decisions and investments, and they can only take place in a context that is, let's say, qualified or that knows a so-called stable legal framework. Without legal certainty, companies will refrain from making the huge investments that are necessary to make waterborne transport a zero-emission waterborne mode of transport. And that is very important. And that also applies, by the way, to IMO decisions. So when the IMO is taking a decision, it should respect its own deadlines. Unfortunately, we have seen recent examples where that has not always been the case, for instance, ballast water management systems. So in other words, without legal certainty, the industry will most likely be reluctant to move forward. But without legal certainty, we will also not incentivize the first movers from moving forward in terms of zero-emission waterborne transport. So it is very important that there is also a stable legal framework. And then last but not least, we believe that the European Commission, as well as the EU, the individual EU member states, should make use, and I mentioned it already in my opening speech, should make use of the political momentum that the Green Deal is offering, but also that the COVID-19 is offering. We believe that these two can be the right momentum for the European Union to safeguard what it has in terms of shipyards and equipment manufacturing, especially on the complex side, but at the same time also reconsider, rethink its policies and aim at stimulating fleet renewal. And the Green Deal is a perfect exercise for that, but also stimulate the retrofitting of existing ships, because it will not just be a matter of building new ships, it will also be a matter of transforming the ships we have today, or that, let's say, will be in service for the next 20 to 25 years, to make them green too, which is most likely an even more complex exercise. And at the end of the day, it is also important, and this is of course against the background of COVID-19, that the money, that the funds that are available are used to accelerate the greening of, to accelerate zero-emission waterborne transport, but equally to stimulate demand in green vessels.
I think that you have presented a very interesting overview of various EU legislative initiatives for zero-emission waterborne transport, and I think that you have put our knowledge of the subject in order. Thanks very much, but I have a question, or even two questions. You mentioned the idea of the European Commission to include shipping in the EU emissions trading system. And you added that the Sea Europe has proposed to set up an EU maritime fund under which the money collected from the polluting companies would be reinvested directly into the maritime sector to support its development towards zero-emission waterborne transport. As far as I have understood, setting up the maritime fund and this way of using this money has been the initiative of Sea Europe. Mm-hmm. So what was the original purpose of the money earned from emissions trading? Were they not originally intended for the maritime fund?
Well, thank you for that question, and it's a very fair question. The way we understand the EU emission trading scheme is that, as a matter of fact, several sectors, economic sectors, are part of the emission trading scheme, and so the polluter pays under that system. But the money that is used under that scheme can be used for many purposes. Not necessarily to be reinvested in the sector that is contributed to it. So if I may make it a bit provocative, you could envisage that the money that polluting shipping companies pay under the EU emission trading scheme, if it would apply, is used for shipping, but it can equally be used for the greening of the airline industry, for any other sector that is covered by that system. And to an extent, we also consider it a bit as a kind of taxpayers mechanism. And starting from the observation that the zero emission waterborne transport is a complex exercise, not just to put it into reality, but also in terms of the investments that are into it, we believe that a system whereby the money goes back to the sector can only stimulate, accelerate the greening of the sector. Now, without being too complex, the problem of EU ETS is that is a kind of boundary that is allowed by the member states, because we are talking about tax mechanism, and member states are very much attached to taxation because it's still their competence. Now, it would be conceivable to, under the name of EU ETS, to create, from what I understand, also a sector-specific room, sector-specific pot that can help the shipping industry. But what is very important for us is that the money that is paid by the sector goes back to the sector to support the efforts that are needed. That's the thinking behind our proposal.
Many thanks to Sea Europe for this valuable initiative. You have also mentioned some political tensions, so to say, between Europe and China or the Asian players. Mm-hmm. Let's assume that decarbonization of shipping will recover European maritime industry. How can European shipyards may secure the benefit of this recovery against heavily subsidized by the state aggressive Chinese competition?
I will start my answer like the previous speaker. That is the $1 billion question. I think this is going to be a key one. It goes without saying that for the European Commission, the Green Deal is not just a flag initiative. It is also, I would say, an initiative with which they want to win the green revolution competition from the others. At the same time, we also know that many ships are built in Asia by, as you rightly say, a very heavily subsidized, let's say, sector. Now, we don't have that type of subsidies, and we can have a long debate whether, let's say, subsidization of the sector is good or bad. But what will be fundamental for the European Union is to consider the following. It's, in my view, going to be very difficult to win the competition from the Asians on the basis of price and cost, because of the fact that they are heavily subsidized and we are not. So, in my opinion, the only way that Europe can really turn the Green Deal into a business opportunity and help the sector is by, I would call it, do the competition of the basis of standards. So if we impose high standards in terms of greening, most likely also in terms of other standards like social and so on, and we are very, let's say, serious about that, and we also impose it on ships that are trading into European waters. In my opinion, and this is of course also not an easy one because there are some legal issues linked to it, but only in that way we can win the battle. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. And despite all the good intentions of the European Green Deal and the necessity to make the shipping industry greener, as long as we don't, let's say, bridge the gap or tackle that problem, we will not be able to win it. And as a matter of fact, and then I finish my answer. As a matter of fact, as we speak, the Commission is looking into an initiative to stop or to avoid or address competitive distortions coming from foreign subsidies, like the ones we know in our sector. And in that respect, our sector, shipyards, don't benefit from trade defense instruments like anti-dumping and so on to bridge the price gap that we have. So also that is going to be a very important element to be solved soonest. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we will continue to be in troubled water.
Okay. Thank you, Christoph, for this explanation. I hope that we will meet during the final part of our conference, the final discussion.
Yeah.
And now, since we have to stick to our schedule, now I'd like to ask the next panelist, who is Hege Oakland from Norway.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present some of our work in developing and launching green maritime technologies. As have been mentioned from the previous presenters, we are facing major challenges in reducing our carbon footprint fast enough. According to the Paris Agreement, Norway has committed itself to reduce emissions from domestic shipping by 50% within 2030, already 9 years from now. And as has already been mentioned, IMO has stated that international shipping should reduce its emission by 50% within 2050. So there will be local regulation, regional and international regulations to take into considerations. This transition will be challenging, but at the same time, it will open up new opportunities for the maritime industry. Stricter regulations will result in a growing market for companies that can provide zero and low emission solutions. But from a ship owner perspective, it can be difficult to navigate in this future and to see what the future fuel will be, for instance. The shipping industry needs to navigate both in a short-term perspective, but also to take into consideration what kind of operation considerations the ship will have for the next 10, 20, 30 years, which will be a lifetime of the ship. So you need to design your ship today for the future. And you need to have in mind that several fuels will be made available during this period. So fuel flexibility will maybe be the key word for the ship owner now and for the future. I represent a Norwegian Center of Expertise called NCE Maritime Cleantech. This is a business cluster with more than 140 partners that are working together across and along the value chain to develop and launch low and zero emission solutions to the maritime sector. And the background and the main mission for our work is to meet global climate goals and to reduce both local emissions and greenhouse gases from shipping. And as you can see, we have ship owners from a range of different segments. We have operators on board, in addition to class societies and R&D and education, among others. And it is so important to have all these partners on board when developing new solutions. And I will give you some examples of this during my presentation. From this cluster, a range of different innovative vessels have been launched. And these vessels have new energy systems, introducing new fuels and new energy carriers like batteries, hydrogen and ammonia, to mention some. And we are demonstrating this technology on board operating vessels. The world's first electric car ferry started its operation back in 2015. This ferry has braved the way for electrification in short sea shipping. The ferry has been designed and built with close collaboration between the Norwegian yard Fjords and the Polish yard Aluship in Gdansk. And Fjords has also had a close collaboration with Nelton Engineering Company. So I think this ferry demonstrates also the close collaboration between the Norwegian maritime industry and the Polish maritime cluster. This ferry has demonstrated that the battery technology is working and is actually reducing operational cost, both fuel cost and also maintenance cost. And it's so important that seeing is believing for politicians, amongst others. So now it has been said in a governmental resolution that all new ferry tenders needs to have low or zero emission technology. So during 2021, more than 70 electrical ferries will be in operation. Another example of an all-electric passenger ship is this ferry called Future of the Fjords. This is a sightseeing vessel built by Brødrene Aa in Norway, and the vessel became in operation in 2018 and is operating in the World Heritage Fjords in Norway. As you can see, the design of the hull is quite characteristic and is supposed to mirror the zigzagging mountains path they sail beside. The boat is powered by 2 electric engines of 585 horsepower each and receive power from a battery pack of 1800 kilowatt hours. And this battery pack represents about 40 times the capacity of a typical electrical car. In the cluster, we have also doing a lot of development and demonstration in close collaboration with many European partners. And it's important that during this period that we are validating new fuels to secure that it's safe and there are class rules together developed with the project. And I will give you a brief introduction of some of the projects. The TRAM project is a a high-speed passenger vessel, which will be operating of a maximum 25 knots and has installed 1,500 kilowatt hours of battery capacity. In this project, it's not only about making a zero-emission vessel, it's also about how to reduce engineering and construction cost by using advanced and modular production. The project is revolutionary, both in terms of the zero-emission technology and the manufacturing methods, and will contribute to making electric-powered vessels competitive in terms of both cost and the environment. And this vessel will start operating outside Stavanger during the spring of 2022, also next year. The Ship FC project is about installing a 2 megawatt ammonia fuel cell system on board an operating offshore vessel called Viking Energy, owned by the Eidesvik ship owner in Norway. And the goal of this project is to demonstrate the feasibility of ammonia fuel cells for ocean-going vessels. And the next step will be to reduce emissions from more energy-demanding vessels operating deep sea. In the HyShip project, which was launched this fall, there are three main goals which we will achieve. The vessel will be operating on liquid hydrogen and will distribute hydrogen also on containers, which they will distribute along the Norwegian coast. This vessel will also take cargo, which today is being sent by trucks, and now will be more and make sea transport more competitive, both in cost and environmental ways. And the last project here, flagship project, this is about demonstrating compressed hydrogen on two operating vessels. One of the vessels will be operating in Paris and will be the first cargo vessel on operating on compressed hydrogen. So as you can see, in these four projects, we are demonstrating different energy systems on a range of different vessels. And the result of this vessel can be replicated to other markets and bring the industry fast up towards low or zero emission. So the next question then is to reduce emission from the large energy demanding vessels operating deep sea. And in the cluster, we have several ship owners working together with the industry to develop solutions which can reduce carbon footprint from their activities. And one of the ship owners is Odfjell. And they are together with industrial partners like Wärtsilä, developing energy system consisting of fuel cells, which use LNG or at a later stage ammonia as a fuel in the fuel cells, and it then has been transferred to electricity. And as Odfjell says here, this will contribute to significant emission reductions at sea with zero emission capability. And they will patent the solution, which is now under construction. And the fuel cell will be installed and piloted on an Odfjell ship after 2022. And they are starting with LNG, but as mentioned, when introducing ammonia, CO2 emissions will be zero. So the technology is being developed, but it's more about the infrastructure and the new supply chains for the green fuel, like for instance, ammonia. Will this fuel be available on a global scale so that ship owners can install this technology? in the near future. And I think that is my main message to you in the audience, that we need to work closely together, not only in the maritime industry, but we need to work across sectors to develop new supply chains, new infrastructure, and new incentives for making this transition easier or faster. Thank you.
So this is the vision by your cluster. I have a question. How many years, in your opinion, will this vision become a reality? And what share the companies gathered in the cluster will have in this venture?
Well, I don't think really we have an option. We need to reduce our carbon footprint according to the Paris Agreement at the pace which is necessary. As mentioned, this technology development is ongoing now, but the main barrier is to make the business model competitive towards fossil fuels, for instance. So it's really not about the technology, it's more about the business models and the infrastructure for new fuels. And I, of course, hope that all the European maritime industry actors can take a significant part of this in this contribution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, but let's talk a little bit about money. This vision is exciting, but it's very expensive to turn it into reality. So what is the financial scheme to make it possible in Norway?
Yeah, in Norway we have a good funding schemes to test and demonstrate new technology from governmental funds, and we also have the new Horizon or the new investment fund from EU, Horizon Europe, as a good funding scheme for doing this kind of pilot project. Mm-hmm. But to make major transition worldwide, as you're asking about, I think maybe the answer, as been said earlier, is to set up a global carbon tax, for instance, by IMO, and let the industry use this tax for the transition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, and please stay with us. In our conference, it is now time to hear the points of view of shipyards and then the ship owners as well. The next panelist will be Dariusz Jaguszewski, member of the management board of Remontowa Shipbuilding Yard, part of the Remontowa Holding Group in Gdańsk.
Okay. As it was mentioned, we are part of holding, Remontowa Holding, which is biggest holding responsible for ship industry. There is 25 companies within. Two most important are Remontowa Ship Repair, who is responsible for ship repair and conversion. Remontowa Shipbuilding, who is responsible for new buildings. And what is very important within our organization, we have Remontowa Design and Consulting Company, which is responsible for design which servicing both this yard for conversion and also for new building. During last 20 years, we built 131 fully equipped vessels. It's our key issue. We are design and build vessel ready for operation. As you can see on this page, we mostly focus on offshore vessel and ferries. During the last 12 years, we built 20 ferries cooperating with Norway. 10 of these ferries has been built as LNG powered. 2 of them has been built and delivered to Norway. Last our production, that's a series of 4 hybrid ferries designed and built for Norway. Now we have on the screen a picture of 3 vessels, double-enders, designed and built for biggest Northern American operator, BC Ferries. We designed and built such 3 vessels and delivered these vessels within 2016 and 17. Concept of this vessel and full package of documentation has been prepared by Remontowa Marine and Design. What is very interesting on this vessel, first time on this vessel has been used new idea on bunkering, because usually to bunker such vessels equipped with LNG tank and dual fuel genset, that was solution with tank truck, which has been parked along vessel and then transfer this medium to the vessel, or from time to time small bunkering vessel moored ship to and bunker the vessel. Because in Vancouver area owner haven't such possibilities, we propose to do bunkering from the truck, which is parked on the main deck. That's create a lot of challenges, but finally we did this job successfully. Next example of low emission vessel is again a double-ender, which has been delivered to Transport of London, operating on the Tamisa River. Vessel built and designed as a hybrid vessel. There is not only one solution, hybrid as something which reduce emission, but on this vessel we use a lot of other solutions, like for example electromagnetic mooring system connected with azimuth thrusters and all propulsion system to reduce emission. There is a lot of other solutions like permanent magnet propulsion motors, guaranteeing very efficiency, very good efficiency even on the low load. Next example, that is 4th vessel which has been delivered to Norlet. Vessel built and designed as a hybrid vessel with a rapid charging system. 3 double-enders has been delivered in 2020. Last ferry has been delivered in the beginning of February. Vessel has been designed based on Norwegian design office concept, LMG, but workshop documentation and partly approval documentation has been done with cooperation with our design office. Of course, as usually for such vessels, we have a lot of other solutions which reduce emission from these vessels. During cooperation, again, we use permanent magnet propulsion motors. We use a lot of other solutions like energy saving. Additionally, we use LED lighting system. Next vessel, which is not connected with ferries, but that is, in my opinion, very interesting vessels. We delivered 2 such PSV vessels to Swedish owner, Viking Supply. Second vessel has been supplied in the middle of last week. On this vessel, we are using dual fuel gensets. Additionally, on board has been installed system of battery pack to increase efficiency of propulsion systems. Now I would like to say shortly about what our colleague from Remontowa Shipyards did on the market of green maritime technologies. For our good client, BC Ferries, they did 2 conversions of Spirit class ferries. Spirit of British Columbia and Spirit of Vancouver Island. One of this conversion has been done between 2017 and 18. Next vessel has been converted 1 year after that. This vessel has been converted to dual fuel propulsion system, so that means 4 main engine. Dual fuels have been installed on board with LNG tank, with bunkering station, with all system to transfer new medium to propulsion system. A lot of other modification additionally has been done, like modification of gear, rudder set, steering system, modification of boat thruster. Additionally, a lot of system has been converted to reduce emission, for example, LED lighting. Second, very interesting example of activity of our colleague from Remontowa Ship Repair, its conversion of Stena Germanica. It is one of ferries from Stena line, which has been converted in 2015 to methanol. That means 4 main engines has been modified in yard to use this new fuel. During Green Ship Technology Conference in 2015, Stena has been awarded as Ship Owner of the Year because of this conversion. All these examples of conversion of new buildings is in fact history. Some of them are a bit longer, some of bit shorter, because vessel has been delivered 5 years ago, some of them 2 months ago, but all of them in fact are history. But we are focusing on the future. I would like to say shortly about what we are doing now, what idea we have for the future on the market of green maritime technologies. Remontowa Shipbuilding is a member of a Polish Hydrogen Partnership, established and acting under supervision of Polish Ministry of Climate and Environment. As a yard, we arrange with 3 Polish companies and 1 foreigner company consortium. Consortium responsible to design and build harbor tug, which will operate under hydrogen. We prepare a full set of documentation and we send official application to use status of important project of Common Union Europe interest. Last week, Friday, we sent our offer to our Norwegian client to design and build zero-emission asphalt carrier based on compressed hydrogen. Additionally, we are closely cooperating with one of Polish ship owner based on signed agreement to design and build hydrogen-powered coaster vessel. Of course, preparing this concept analysis, concept design, and all necessary analysis for our client. We are closely cooperating with a lot of companies, suppliers, and producers of such a system, which are connected with ammonia, hydrogen, methanol idea to use as a fuel.
Okay, and how do you assess the potential of your group, of Remontowa Holding Group, in terms of designing and building ships powered by hydrogen, ammonia, or other alternative fuels? You have already showed us the example of one such vessel, but are you developing more such projects?
As you mentioned, Grzegorz, in fact, partly to last picture in my presentation giving answer to this question, but we are absolutely sure that 2050 target will change shipbuilding industry. That is absolutely clear for us. And we do not afraid these challenges which will be created, in our opinion, now it's created for yard, for design offices, for our yard, for our design offices. Even we see chance. In this part, we see chance for the future because of 2050 targets for our yards. Having such experience with LNG propelled vessel based on the battery system, electrically powered vessel with rapid charging system, we are absolutely sure that we are in the good starting point to find benefits for coming days and find cooperation and sign contract with our clients. What is very important, that is to be leader from the very beginning of these activities. Our opinion, that it's really last moment to start work with clients, with classification society, with maritime administration, to be partner to our clients, to keep our position on the green maritime technologies market.
Okay, thank you very much, Darek, and please stay with us. In your presentation, you have also mentioned long and fruitful cooperation with Norwegian ship owners. And now it is time to invite one of them to speak. The next and last panelist in this part of the conference is Mr. Sigvald Breivik, Chief Technological Officer and Technical Director at Norled, one of Norway's largest ferry transportation companies.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for the invitation. It was very interesting to listen to the other speeches. So I have worked with Norled 10 years now in order to reduce emission and energy consumption in ferries in the fleets of Norled. And of course, we are working in a public tender regime, and we are meeting the requirements set by the public in the tenders. So that's a way of the transition makes it easier when you have a public funding behind all the requirements. So let's try to next. Yes. So Norled is one of 4 large ferry operators in Norway. We have Norled, Tidgett, Fjords 1, and Boreal as the players in the ferry and express boat market, and we have operation along the coast of Norway. And in 2011, we start working on this MF Ampere. That was the first electric ferry launched in Norway in 2015. And the Ampere came through a tender process with the road administration, where the road administration asked the ferry market, what can we do to reduce the emission and the energy consumption? And we introduced a fully electric ferry in that tender and won the tender to build and operate for a 10-year contract. The same process the road administration started 3 years ago to try to introduce a hydrogen ferry, a pilot to show that we can operate on hydrogen on the longest and roughest ferry routes or lines we have along the coast. And the special thought was on this Vestfjorden tender. You saw a picture of the ferries built by Remontova to Tidgett in 2012, and they will now be run on hydrogen from 2025. So, and we are currently building this MF Hydra that will run on hydrogen from next year on the floating hydrogen. So there's a lot of things and transition happening in Norway, and we are more or less a small playground to try to develop system and market in order to take this into more segments of shipping. So I will just show you that we have had a long and good cooperation with the Polish shipyards. Hege told you that this MF Ampere, the superstructure and the hull, was built by Gdansk shipyard, Aluship, and also we have been working with Remontova since 1999. I think Darius was the head of engineering at that time, and this building program we have had 4 electric ferries delivered in 2020 and 2021, as Darius said. And the timeline in Norway looks like this. We started MF Ampere process and launching and started operation in 2015. And between 2015 until now, we have had tenders with at least 80 zero-emission electric ferries involved. Norled has won some of them, and Fjords has won some of them, and Boreal and Torghatten. So in 2022, we will in Norway have 80 electrical ferries in Norway, and we have approximately 200 ferries operating. So we are halfway of the electrification of the fleet. And of course, batteries can be used on crossings up to 20-30 minutes because of the charging capacity and those things. So now in 2021 we will introduce this MF Hydra running on liquefied hydrogen, showing that this can scale up to be used on this very rough trade area, Vestfjorden, in north of Norway, in Bodø. And MF Hydra is a pilot project that will consume only 150 kilo of hydrogen every day. So half of the energy on board the ship will come from the hydrogen system, and half of it will come from the electrical grid charging from shore. So Vestfjorden will be the big game changer in Norway when it comes to use of hydrogen. And also with all the other initiatives, we believe that in 2030 we will see a lot of ships on hydrogen or other zero-emission fuels along the coast of Norway, and hopefully out in the deep sea shipping as well. MF Hydra, as I said, are built in Ølen at Westcon Yard. The hydrogen system will be delivered from Linde technology and will be placed on the top of the ferry to have it as a safe system. And we have used the IMO code for alternative design, risk-based approach, to make this system as safe as possible. And this ferry should be safer, or at least same safety level as a diesel ferry. And DNVGL are with us, and the Norwegian Maritime authorization are also working with us on this system. And as I said, this is a showcase, and we will show and prove that this can be used on bigger vessel and higher energy demanding vessels. In Norway now we have a new goal of making express boats zero emission or low emission from 2025. And Norled, together with one of the operator, are with Fjellstrand and the cluster in Maritime Cleantech, will now construct and build and operate express boat that will operate outside Stavanger. And we think that the express boats will be the next step into zero emission shipping in Norway. Thank you.
Thank you, Sigvald. Thank you very much. But let me present some questions about this very interesting contribution. Norled, as you have mentioned, has ordered as the first in Norway the ferry powered by hydrogen. But why have you actually decided to choose hydrogen, especially taking into account numerous limitations, for example, limited potential of large-scale production and availability of green hydrogen? Mr. Knut Orbeck Nielsen was talking about that. There are many other limitations for this kind of fuel, such as cost, limited or even lack of bunkering options, and many others. So why have you decided to jump into this swimming pool?
Very good question. But as I said, we are in a public purchase regime, and the politics and the road administration want to introduce hydrogen as a fuel. And also to prove, because we don't see any other option in fuels to be used on this West fuel, on this big crossing. And at the moment, we only see hydrogen as feasible to make it zero emission. So it is a mix of politics, business, and opportunities. That's the reason why we have gone for liquefied hydrogen.
Okay, and what are, in your opinion, what are the prospects for using this fuel on a wider scale in short sea shipping, not only in Norway but in Europe?
We believe that if we can make it cheap enough and make it green, that's most important, because at the moment there are very limited availability of green hydrogen. If you can make it cheap enough, green, then we can, as we see it, we can use it on short sea shipping at least. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for your performance. And Sigvald was our last panelist. So thank you very much for your extraordinary contribution and for your presence, and that you dedicated your time to be with us. I hope that we will meet next year in normal circumstances. And online meetings are wonderful, but I guess that we are a bit fed up of this kind of way of communication. Nothing can replace direct meetings. So I hope that next year we will again meet at the Greenmare Conference. It will be hopefully second edition, and we will have an opportunity to meet directly to talk face to face. So thank you very much once more. I would like also to thank the organizers of the event. Thank you and bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.